The smell of burning corduroy is something you don't forget. It's thick, like scorched earth and melting plastic, catching in the back of your throat. When my son threw his mother's quilt into the fire, the room went dead silent. I didn't yell. I just reached into the flames. Because some trash is worth burning for. I didn't wrap it. Wrapping paper always felt like a lie anyway, a shiny, temporary promise meant to hide whatever mundane thing was actually sitting inside the box. So, I just folded it up, tight as I could, and shoved it into a heavy-duty canvas tote bag. It was heavy. It had the dense, suffocating weight of wet sand. Liam's new house was out in the hills, built into a ridge like a concrete wedge shoved into the dirt. It was all sharp angles, black steel, and massive sheets of glass that reflected the gray afternoon sky. The kind of house that didn't look like anyone actually lived in it. It looked like a rendering from one of those magazines left behind in a dentist's waiting room. I parked my Ford down at the bottom of the long driveway. The truck was shedding rust, a slow decay I'd given up trying to patch, and I didn't want it leaking oil on Liam's pristine aggregate driveway. My knees popped as I climbed out. The air up here felt thinner, colder. I grabbed the canvas bag from the passenger seat. My knuckles were stiff, the joints inflamed from 30 years of turning wrenches and pulling copper wire. I stood there for a minute, looking up at the glowing windows of the house. I could see them inside, little shadows moving around in a kitchen the size of my entire ground floor. Liam had done well. Better than well. He was 32. Vice president of something vague and digital that I never fully understood, making the kind of money that turns people into different versions of themselves. I was proud of him, I think. But mostly, standing out there in the cold, I just felt tired. I walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. Every step felt loud. I rang the bell. It didn't buzz. It chimed. A soft, synthetic note that faded into the expensive wood of the front door. Liam opened it. He was wearing a dark sweater that looked thin but probably cost more than my first car. His hair was cropped neat, the slight gray at his temples making him look distinguished instead of old. "Dad," he said. His smile was tight, not unwelcoming. Exactly, just braced. "You made it." "Traffic on the 89, I muttered, stepping inside. The house smelled of ozone, fresh drywall, and some kind of citrus candle that burned the inside of my nose. It was loud in a hollow way. About 30 people were scattered across the open-plan living room, holding stemless glasses of pale wine, their voices bouncing off the polished concrete floors and the vaulted, exposed beam ceiling. "Let me take your coat," Liam said, reaching for my canvas jacket. He eyed the heavy tote bag in my left hand. "What's that?" "Housewarming," I said, my voice sounding unnecessarily gruff. I didn't let go of the bag. "You didn't have to." He guided me into the living room. "Sarah's by the island. Go say hi. I've got to check on the caterers." He vanished into the crowd. I stood near a massive leather sectional, feeling like a stray dog that had wandered into a sterile laboratory. The people around me were Liam's peers. Clean teeth, expensive watches, clothes that draped perfectly. I caught fragments of conversation, interest rates, ski trips to Aspen, something about a startup in Berlin. I looked down at the tote bag resting against my leg. Inside was Mary's quilt. Mary, my wife, Liam's mother. She had been dead for 6 years. Cancer took her slow, hollowing her out from the inside until she was just a whisper of the woman who used to yell at me for tracking mud onto the linoleum. In the last 2 years of her life, when she couldn't leave the house, she started sewing. She wasn't good at it. She had no eye for color, no patience for straight lines. She just took scraps of our lives and violently stitched them together with heavy dark thread. The quilt was, objectively, hideous. It was a chaotic clash of textures and eras. There were squares of my old flannel work shirts, stained with grease, that never quite washed out. There was a patch of faded yellow corduroy from Liam's overalls when he was 3, a piece of an old floral curtain from our first apartment, a jagged strip of scratchy gray wool from a military blanket. It was lumpy. The batting was uneven, making the whole thing look diseased. But she had worked on it every single day, sitting in her recliner, the oxygen tube trailing from her nose, her thin, bruised fingers pushing the needle through the heavy fabrics. "It's for Liam's first real house," she had told me once, her voice raspy and thin, something to keep him warm when those fancy walls get cold. I had kept it in a cedar chest since she passed. I couldn't look at it. It smelled too much like her, like lavender lotion and the faint, metallic scent of her medication. But Liam had bought his real house. It was time. "Arthur." I turned. Sarah, Liam's wife, was walking toward me. She was striking, blonde, wearing a beige outfit that matched the walls. She hugged me, a brief, sterile press of shoulders. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her eyes already scanning the room behind me. "Can I get you something? A Pinot? Or we have some local IPA?" "Water's fine," I said. She flagged down a waiter, an actual waiter in a black vest, and got me a glass of sparkling water. I hated sparkling water. It tasted like static. "Liam says you brought a gift?" she asked, looking at the bag. "Yeah, it's from Mary. From his mother." Sarah's expression softened, but I could see the slight panic in her eyes. The house was meticulously curated. Nothing in it had history. Nothing in it had dirt. I knew she was terrified of whatever bulky, sentimental object was in that bag, wondering which closet she could bury it in. "That's so sweet, Arthur. We're doing a little toast and opening a few things by the fireplace in a bit. You should bring it over." The fireplace wasn't a fireplace. It was an architectural statement. A massive slab of dark slate built into the center of the room, open on three sides. Inside, synthetic ceramic logs sat over a bed of crushed blue glass. A switch on the wall ignited a roaring, perfectly controlled wall of gas flame. It provided zero heat, but it looked expensive. Around 8 o'clock, the crowd gravitated toward the fire. The caterers had cleared the plates, and people were leaning against the expensive furniture, laughing, their faces flushed from the wine. Liam stood by the slate hearth, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking like a king surveying a very clean, very beige kingdom. All right, a guy in a tailored vest yelled over the chatter. "Speech, Liam, and open the loot." Liam laughed, holding up his hands. He gave a short, polished speech about hard work, good friends, and the future. Everyone clapped. Then Sarah brought over a few impeccably wrapped boxes, a crystal decanter, a sleek, silver espresso machine, a piece of abstract art that looked like a rust stain on canvas. Liam thanked everyone, making jokes, playing the perfect host. I stood at the back of the circle. The bag was heavy. My hand was sweating against the canvas handles. I wanted to leave. I wanted to put the bag down and walk out the front door, get in my truck, and drive back down the mountain. But I remembered Mary's bruised fingers. I pushed through the crowd. The chatter died down a bit as I stepped up to the hearth. "Brought this," I said, my voice flat. I dropped the canvas bag by Liam's expensive leather shoes. Liam looked at the bag, then up at me. "Dad, thanks. You really didn't need to." "Open it." He hesitated. He could feel the shift in the room's energy, the sudden intrusion of something unpolished. He knelt down, unzipped the canvas tote, and reached inside. He pulled it out. The quilt unfolded like a wounded animal. It cascaded over his arms, heavy and misshapen. Under the harsh, recessed LED lighting of the living room, it looked worse than I remembered. The clashing colors, puke green, faded denim, mustard yellow, screamed against the muted tones of the house. A few loose threads hung from the uneven seams. It looked like garbage. The silence in the room wasn't respectful. It was awkward. It was the silence of 30 wealthy people trying desperately not to judge something pathetic. Liam's face flushed. A deep, ugly red crept up his neck. He was holding his mother's dying effort, and all he felt was shame. Shame of the ugly object. Shame of me, standing there in my scuffed boots. "Wow," Sarah said, her voice thin and high, breaking the silence. "That is so rustic. Arthur, did you buy that at the flea market?" "Mary made it," I said. I looked directly at Liam. "Your mother made it. before she died. She wanted you to have it for your new house. Liam swallowed hard. He looked at the quilt, his hands gripping the frayed edges. He had been drinking, not drunk, but loose enough that the filter between his brain and his mouth was failing. He looked around at his friends. He saw a guy named Bryce, a hedge fund manager. Liam desperately wanted to impress, smirk slightly, and take a sip of his wine. That smirk broke something in my son. He chose the room over his history. Yeah, Liam said, forcing a loud, hollow laugh. He shifted the bulk of the quilt in his arms. Mom always was eccentric. I mean, look at this thing. It's basically a drop cloth. Jesus, Dad. It smells like mothballs and old soup. Liam, Sarah hissed, suddenly realizing the danger. But Liam was riding the nervous energy of the crowd. He wanted to diffuse the awkwardness, to turn it into a joke. He wanted to show his friends that he wasn't tied to this ugly working-class relic. Honestly, it's perfect, Liam said, turning toward the open gas fire. We were just saying the fire looked a little bare. Need some real tinder in there to get it going, right? He didn't mean to actually do it. I know he didn't. It was a gesture, a sweeping, theatrical motion meant to mimic tossing a rag away. But the quilt was heavy. The weight of it caught his momentum, slipping from his grip. It flew from his hands and landed directly on top of the roaring gas flames. Someone screamed. A short, sharp gasp from one of the women. For a split second, nothing happened. The synthetic fire just licked at the heavy denim and wool. Then, the patch of yellow corduroy, the fabric from Liam's childhood overalls, caught. A bright orange flame shot up, followed immediately by a thick ribbon of acrid black smoke. Liam froze, his mouth falling open, his eyes wide with sudden horrifying sobriety. "Shit!" he yelled, stepping back from the heat. He didn't reach for it. Nobody did. They just stood there, watching it burn. I didn't have a grand, emotional revelation. I just moved. I shoved past Liam, my shoulder clipping his chest hard enough to knock him off balance. I stepped directly onto the crushed blue glass of the hearth. The heat hit my face like an open oven door, singing the fine hairs on my cheeks. I plunged both hands into the fire. The flames wrapped around my wrists. I grabbed the thickest part of the quilt, a patch of heavy green wool, and yanked. The fabric tore, a sickening ripping sound, but the bulk of it came free. I dragged it out of the fire, pulling it onto the pristine, white Moroccan rug that covered the living room floor. The edges were still on fire. I fell to my knees and started beating the flames with my bare hands. I slapped the burning corduroy, the smoldering flannel. The smell of burnt hair and roasting flesh hit my nose. My palms blistered instantly, a white-hot, searing pain that shot up my forearms, but I kept hitting the fabric until the last orange ember died into a smoking black crust. I stayed on my knees for a moment, breathing heavily. The smoke alarm beeped twice from the ceiling, then went silent. The living room was absolutely still. The only sound was the artificial hiss of the gas fire behind me and my own ragged breathing. I looked down at my hands. The skin on my right palm was already peeling back, shiny and red. Black soot coated my knuckles. I looked at the white rug. It was ruined. Streaked with charcoal, melted polyester, and a few drops of my blood where the skin had split. Slowly, I stood up. Liam was pale, trembling. He took a step toward me, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. Dad, my God, your hands. I'm sorry. I didn't. It slipped. I didn't look at his face. I bent down, ignoring the screaming pain in my hands, and gathered the smoking, ruined bulk of the quilt against my chest. It was hot, burning through my flannel shirt, but I held it tight. "Arthur, let me get some ice," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. I walked past her. I walked past the guy named Bryce. I walked through the crowd of silent, expensive people, leaving a trail of ash and the smell of destruction in my wake. I opened the heavy front door with my elbow and walked out into the cold night. The steering wheel of my truck was cold, and gripping it felt like holding a fistful of broken glass. I drove with my wrists and the heels of my hands, keeping my blistered palms open to the air. I drove down the mountain. The heater in the truck was broken, blowing only tepid air, but the chill was good. It kept me awake. The cab reeked of smoke. The quilt sat on the passenger seat, a charred, ugly lump. I didn't cry. I just felt a deep, hollow crater in my chest. I had spent 6 years trying to preserve a piece of Mary, and it took my son less than 6 seconds to turn it into a joke. I wasn't even angry at Liam anymore. I was just done. The cord had snapped. He was in his glass house, and I was in my rusting truck, and there was no road between us anymore. It took me 40 minutes to get back to my place, a small single-story ranch on a quarter-acre lot that needed mowing. I parked in the driveway, killed the engine, and just sat there for a long time, listening to the metal ticking as it cooled. Finally, I grabbed the quilt and went inside. I went to the kitchen first. I ran my hands under the cold tap. The water hit the burns and my vision whited out for a second. I bit down on my lip until I tasted copper. I found some burn ointment in the bathroom cabinet and smeared it on, wrapping my hands clumsily in loose gauze. It looked pathetic, like a bad Halloween costume, but it took the edge off the burning. I walked back into the kitchen. I had dropped the quilt on the linoleum floor. I needed to see the damage. I dragged it up onto the old Formica kitchen table, pulling the overhead light string. It was bad. The top right corner where the yellow corduroy had been was completely gone, reduced to a jagged, blackened crater. The fire had burned through the top layer of patches, eaten through the cheap polyester batting, and scorched the plain gray backing. But as I spread it out, smoothing the unburned sections with the side of my arm, I noticed something. Where the fire had burned a hole entirely through the quilt, the heat had melted the batting away, leaving a cavity between the top patches and the backing. I leaned in closer. The smell of ash was suffocating. Inside the charred hole, tucked deep between the layers of fabric where the batting should have been, there was a strange, stiff edge sticking out. It wasn't fabric. It didn't look like batting. It looked like thick, heavy paper. My heart did a strange, slow thump. I went to the drawer by the sink and pulled out Mary's old fabric shears. My hands were shaking, and gripping the handles sent fresh spikes of pain through my palms, but I ignored it. I started cutting. I bypassed the burned section and slid the heavy lower blade of the scissors between the gray backing and the front patches, cutting along the seam of a blue denim square. Snip, snip, snip. I peeled back the denim. Underneath, resting flat against the batting, was a rectangular pouch made of heavy muslin, sewn shut with tight, frantic stitches. I stared at it. I touched it with a gauze-wrapped finger. It was solid. I used the tip of the shears to slice open the muslin pouch. Inside was a stack of paper. I pulled it out. They were bills. Old, crisp, $100 bills, held together with a brittle rubber band that snapped the second I touched it. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the dead presidents looking up at me under the harsh kitchen light. There had to be 50 bills in that one stack. $5,000. Mary. I whispered to the empty kitchen. I moved frantically now. I stabbed the scissors into the next seam, ripping through a patch of my old flannel. Another muslin pouch. I cut it open. More hundreds. I tore into a piece of floral curtain. Nothing. I ripped open a square of gray wool. A pouch. I sliced it. Stacks of $50 bills. I spent the next 2 hours destroying the quilt. I didn't care anymore. I tore it apart like a madman, my injured hands bleeding through the gauze, pulling out pouch after pouch. Mary had hidden them everywhere. Not uniformly. Not in a pattern. Just shoved into the pockets of batting, sewn shut so they wouldn't shift or crinkle when the quilt was moved. By 2 a.m., the kitchen table was covered in fabric scraps, black soot, and cash. I sat back in my chair, exhausted, my chest heaving. I looked at the pile. Mary had always handled our finances. She was a bookkeeper for a local auto parts distributor for 30 years. I brought home my paycheck, handed it to her, and she made sure the lights stayed on and the mortgage got paid. I never asked questions. We never seemed to have much extra, but we never went hungry. I knew she did side hustle bookkeeping for a few local restaurants, cash in hand work, but I thought that money just went to groceries or Liam's baseball cleats. I started counting. It took me another hour. When I finished, I sat staring at the number I had written on a notepad. $84,000. $84,000, hoarded over decades, skimmed from her side jobs, saved in secret, wrapped in muslin, and sewn into the ugliest blanket in the world. At the bottom of the pile, underneath a final stack of 20s, I found an envelope. It was sealed. On the front, in Mary's shaky, late-stage handwriting, it said, Arthur, not Liam. Arthur. I picked it up. My thumb left a smear of soot and blood on the paper. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. There was a single sheet of lined notebook paper inside. Artie, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means you finally got rid of this awful blanket, or it fell apart. I know it's ugly. I made it ugly on purpose. I know you, stubborn old bear. If I made it pretty, you'd just fold it up and put it in the cedar chest to gather dust because you wouldn't want to ruin it. I barked out a laugh that sounded more like a choke. I also know you. You'll try to give it to Liam. Don't. Liam is smart, but he's careless. He's always looking at the horizon, never at what's in his hands. This isn't for him. He doesn't need it. This is my egg money. 30 years of doing the books for Jimmy's Diner and the hardware store. Kept it out of the banks. I was saving it for us, Artie, for when you finally put down the wrenches and we could buy that little RV and drive out to see the redwoods. But time beat me to it. So now, it's for you. Pay off the rest of the house. Fix the damn truck. Go see the trees. Do not give this to our son to put into some invisible computer market. Keep your hands dirty, Artie, but let your back rest. I love you, Mary. I sat in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The smell of the smoke was still in my clothes, but beneath it, I swear I could smell lavender lotion. I looked at the $84,000. I looked at the ruined, shredded pile of fabric that had almost burned to ash in a sterile fireplace to amuse a room full of strangers. Liam had called it trash. He had thrown it away. I reached out with my throbbing, bandaged hand and rested it on top of the money. The sun came up gray and indifferent, filtering through the greasy window over the kitchen sink. I hadn't slept. I just sat at the table, watching the daylight slowly illuminate the wreckage of my wife's secret life. The pile of cash looked different in the morning light. Less like a miracle, more like evidence. It smelled heavily of old paper, dust, and the sharp synthetic bite of the gas fire that had almost consumed it. My hands throbbed with a low, rhythmic pulse that matched my heartbeat. The cheap gauze was stuck to the weeping blisters on my palms. I knew if I didn't deal with them now, infection would set in, and I didn't have the time or the patience for gangrene. I found a heavy canvas tool bag in the garage, dumped out the socket wrenches, and packed the money inside. I shoved Mary's letter into the breast pocket of my flannel, right over my heart. Driving to the urgent care clinic was a lesson in misery. Every turn of the steering wheel tore the skin on my palms a little more. The nurse at the clinic was a stout woman with tired eyes who didn't ask too many questions. She peeled the gauze off, clicked her tongue at the ruined flesh, and slathered my hands in a thick, cooling silver sulfadiazine cream. "You grabbing hot pans barehanded, old man?" she asked, wrapping my hands tightly in fresh, sterile white bandages. "Something like that," I muttered. "Keep them dry. Don't lift anything heavier than a coffee mug for 2 weeks. And take these." She shoved a small bottle of painkillers across the counter. I didn't take the pills. I needed my head clear. From the clinic, I drove to the local credit union. It wasn't one of those glass and steel monoliths like the bank Liam worked with. It was a squat brick building sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a defunct Blockbuster. The teller was a kid, maybe 22, with a bad haircut and a name tag that said Dennis. He smiled a practiced, customer service smile as I dropped the heavy tool bag onto the counter. The heavy thud made him blink. "How can I help you today, sir?" "Deposit," I said. My voice sounded like rusted metal. I unzipped the bag and started pulling out the stacks. The muslin pouches were gone, but the brittle rubber bands remained, holding the hundreds and fifties in thick, uneven bricks. I slid them under the glass partition. Dennis stopped smiling. His eyes darted from the cash, to my heavily bandaged hands, to the dark soot stains on my jacket. The smell of smoke wafted out of the tool bag, thick and pungent. "Sir, this is a lot of cash." 84,000, I said. "Count it." He had to call the branch manager, a nervous woman in a gray pantsuit. They took me into a back office. They had to fill out a currency transaction report for the IRS. They asked where the money came from. "My wife's mattress," I said. I looked the manager dead in the eye. She didn't trust banks. Now she's dead, and I don't want it in the house. They ran the bills through a counting machine. It took 20 minutes. The machine whirred and clicked, spitting out the old soft bills. Some of the money was from the late 90s. When it was done, the manager handed me a deposit slip, $84,000, sitting in a checking account that had previously held just over $1,200. I walked out of the bank feeling entirely hollow. I should have felt rich. I should have felt elated. Instead, I just felt the staggering weight of Mary's discipline. 30 years. 30 years of skimming her own hard work, denying herself new clothes or a better car, just so she could build a raft for us to float on when we got old. And Liam had thrown it into the fire because it didn't match his rug. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It took me a full minute to dig it out with my bandaged clubs. The screen flashed. Liam. He had called 6 times since last night. I swiped the green button with my knuckle and put it on speaker, resting it on the passenger seat of the truck. "Dad, Dad. Oh, thank God. Are you okay?" His voice was tight, high-pitched with a frantic, caffeinated guilt. "I'm fine," I said, putting the truck in gear with my forearms. "Dad, I am so sorry. I had too much wine. I didn't mean to drop it. I was just making a joke, and it slipped. Sarah couldn't sleep all night. She's horrified. We both are. We want to pay for your medical bills. Whatever you need." He was apologizing for the physical fire. He was apologizing for the burns on my hands and the ruined rug in his house. He still didn't understand. "Keep your money, Liam. Clinic was cheap. Dad, please, let me come over. I want to make this right. I know the quilt was important to you. I'll hire someone, a restorer. We can fix it." "You can't fix Ash," I said. "Look, I'm coming over. I'm leaving the office now." "Don't," I said. But he had already hung up. I didn't go home. I drove out to Route 9, past the county line, to a sprawling gravel lot surrounded by chain-link fencing. Faded plastic pennants flapped in the wind. Bob's used RVs and campers. I walked the lot for an hour. The salesman, a guy chewing unlit cigars, tried to steer me toward the gleaming 50-foot luxury coaches that cost more than my house. I ignored him. I walked to the back row, near the fence line where the weeds grew tall. I found it sitting under a large oak tree, a 2004 Winnebago Adventurer. It wasn't pretty. The white exterior paint was chalky, and the brown decals were peeling at the edges. But the tires were good. The undercarriage was rust-free, and when the salesman fired up the engine, it rumbled with a deep, steady bass that you only get from an old Triton V10. I walked inside. It smelled like stale coffee, cedar, and old dust. The upholstery was a muted beige, completely unremarkable. It was perfect. "How much?" I asked. "For you? 22 grand. Needs a new water pump, but she runs strong." "I'll take it. Cashier's check. I'll pick it up tomorrow." When I finally pulled into my driveway late that afternoon, Liam's black Audi was parked on the curb. It looked like a spaceship that had crash-landed in a blue-collar neighborhood. He was sitting on my front porch, wearing a tailored navy topcoat over his office clothes. When he saw my truck, he stood up quickly, his hands jammed into his pockets. I parked, killed the engine, and stepped out. The late afternoon air was biting, smelling of incoming snow. Liam hurried over. His eyes immediately went to my hands, thick with white bandages. He visibly flinched. Jesus, Dad. How bad are they? Second degree, I said, walking past him toward the front door. They'll heal. Dad, wait. He stepped in front of me, blocking the path. His face was pale, his eyes wide and earnest. He looked like the 8-year-old kid who had accidentally thrown a baseball through the garage window. I need you to know I didn't mean to destroy Mom's thing. I know it was just a rag, but I know it meant a lot to you. Just a rag. I stopped. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was handsome. He was successful. He was terrified of being poor, terrified of looking foolish in front of people who would replace him the second his stock portfolio dipped. He had traded depth for polish. I reached into my canvas jacket pocket with a stiff, bandaged hand. I pulled out a small plastic Ziploc bag and handed it to him. He took it, confused. He looked through the clear plastic. Inside was the only piece of the quilt I had salvaged from the fire and the scissors. A jagged, 3-inch square of faded yellow corduroy. The edges were charred black, smelling faintly of smoke. Do you know what that is? I asked him quietly. He stared at it. It's a piece of the quilt. It's from your overalls, the ones you wore when you were 3. You wore them the day we taught you how to ride a tricycle in this driveway. You fell and scraped your knee, and your mother sat on the concrete and held you for an hour until you stopped crying. Liam stared at the yellow fabric. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Your mother didn't make that quilt to match your furniture, Liam. She made it because she knew she was dying. She was losing her hair, her dignity, her life. She took pieces of us, my shirts, your clothes, the curtains, from the first place we ever lived, and she sewed them together because she was terrified we would forget her. I stepped closer to him. My voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy. She wasn't trying to keep your fancy house warm. She was trying to leave a fingerprint behind. And you burned it for a cheap laugh from a guy named Bryce. Liam's eyes filled with tears. He looked down at the plastic bag, his hands shaking slightly. Dad, I didn't know. I didn't think. I know you didn't, I said. That's the problem. You never look at what's actually in your hands. He looked up at me, a single tear spilling over his lower lid, cutting a clean track down his cheek. I'm sorry. I am so deeply sorry. Please, tell me how to fix this. I looked at him. I thought about the $84,000 sitting in my new checking account. I thought about Mary, sitting in her recliner, her bruised fingers pushing the needle, hiding $100 bills inside a fortress of ugly fabric, knowing that Liam's polished world would never look close enough to see the value hidden in the dirt. She was right. He didn't need it. And if he knew about the money, it would change the narrative. He would mourn the lost cash, not the lost love. He would think of it as a financial tragedy, not a spiritual one. I was never going to tell him. There's nothing to fix, Liam, I said gently. I stepped around him and unlocked the front door. Go home to your wife. Enjoy your house. Dad, I'm leaving tomorrow, I said, pushing the door open. Leaving? Where? West, I said, going to see the trees. I walked inside and shut the door. I didn't lock it, but I heard him stand on the porch for a long time before he finally walked away. The sound of his Audi starting up and driving off was quiet, a smooth electric hum that quickly faded into the wind. 2 days later, I was driving through the high desert of Nevada in a 2004 Winnebago. The steering wheel was massive, wrapped in cheap black leather. It hurt to grip it, but the pain was manageable now, a dull ache beneath the thick bandages. The V10 engine roared under the floorboards, loud and unrefined. It drank gas like a sailor on leave, but I didn't care. The bank card in my wallet felt heavy. I had Mary's letter taped to the dashboard, right next to the speedometer. The edges of the paper were already starting to curl in the dry desert sun. The landscape outside the wide windshield was a blur of rusted red rock and sagebrush. It was empty. It was quiet. No glass houses. No synthetic fires, just the endless, stretching highway. I rolled the window down. The cold air rushed in, smelling of dirt and distance. I rested my bandaged arm on the windowsill, looking out at the horizon. We were going to see the redwoods. I didn't know how long it would take to get there, and I didn't know what I was going to do after I saw them. But for the first time in 6 years, the passenger seat didn't feel completely empty. I pressed my foot down on the heavy gas pedal. The old RV surged forward, vibrating violently as we pushed 70 miles an hour, leaving a cloud of dust and exhaust in our wake. We were on our way. If Arthur's journey struck a chord with you, don't keep this story to yourself. Hit that like button to show your support, and share this video with someone who understands the true value of the things we leave behind. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another deep-grounded story from our channel. Drop a comment below what's the most priceless, worthless thing you own. See you in the next video.